In 1994, Whitney Houston stood on a stage and sang, "I Will Always Love You." There is a specific moment in that live performance, right before the final chorus, where she takes a breath, and the entire audience goes completely involuntarily silent. When she finally opens her mouth, the sound she produces bypasses standard musical technique. It is the moment where the distance between a performance and raw emotion vanishes. That extraordinary, once-in-a-civilization voice was the greatest thing that ever happened to Whitney Houston. But as the scale of that gift grew, it became the heaviest thing she ever carried. Understanding her story requires looking past the polished greatest hits to see the human cost required to maintain the image of the world's greatest vocalist. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born in 1963 in Newark, New Jersey. It was a city defined by industry and community, but also by the intense urban pressures that shape a person's identity. She grew up just outside the city in East Orange, in a home that functioned as a rigorous conservatory. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a premier gospel and soul vocalist of the era, singing backup for everyone from Aretha Franklin to Elvis Presley. Whitney was born into a concentrated musical bloodline. Her cousin was pop star Dionne Warwick, and her daily life was anchored by the Black American gospel tradition. She didn't learn to sing through formal scales. Instead, she absorbed the mechanics of breath control and phrasing by watching her mother lead worship at the New Hope Baptist Church. This tradition teaches the voice is not a tool for entertainment, but a vessel. The voice is not yours, it comes through you. Whitney viewed music as testimony, treating her technical mastery as a service to a higher purpose. But inside this divine vessel was a girl who liked clothes and boys, an ordinary teenager whose early career as a model existed alongside an extraordinary gift. This duality was the source of her power. However, it also created a vulnerability, as the industry began to prioritize the gift over the girl. Whitney was a teenager when she was discovered performing at a New York club. It was the moment her life as a private individual began to recede. Clive Davis, the executive who shaped the careers of Bruce Springsteen and Janis Joplin, signed her to Arista Records. He recognized a voice that could bridge the gap between gospel roots and global pop markets. Davis engineered a brand to appeal to gospel, pop, adult contemporary, and international listeners all at once. They stripped away raw edges, surrounding her with the best producers and session musicians money could buy. The results were historic. Her 1985 debut produced 3 #1 singles, making a 22-year-old Whitney the most successful new artist in the world. By this stage, the human being named Whitney had been transformed into a commercial property, a carefully managed vocal product. The industry had taken a sacred instrument and tuned it for maximum commercial extraction, often overlooking the needs of the person carrying it. The difficulty of being a product is that products are expected to function without error. They are not granted the space for complicated feelings or the freedom to be imperfect. The industry's strategy required Whitney to perform at the highest possible level, on demand, every time she stepped onto a stage. For years, she delivered exactly what was required, but she did so at a human cost that went uncalculated by the machine around her. Her story is the collision between the sacred and the commercial. What happens when a voice a person believes belongs to God is claimed by an industry that believes it belongs to shareholders? When we demand a flawless product from our greatest artists, we risk breaking the vessel. We are left with the music, but we lose the person who gave it meaning. Imagine the psychological weight of starting your career being told by everyone around you that you are already the absolute greatest, full stop. Before any of that happened, the foundation of her voice was built in a deeply human, sacred space. She grew up singing in the gospel traditions of her family's church. She was a kid from Newark, New Jersey, a real person living a tangible life long before any global fame consumed her. Then came the intervention of Clive Davis and Arista Records. They recognized the raw power of her voice and meticulously packaged the girl from Newark for massive mainstream crossover success. Through that packaging process, she ceased to be a regular singer. She was constructed into an absolute industry benchmark, setting up a permanent tension between the human being she actually was and the incredibly lucrative product she was turned into. The expectations placed on her were entirely different from those placed on other talented artists. She was required to be transcendent every single time she stood in front of a microphone. Every new tour was ruthlessly judged against the last. Every live local run had to match the perfection of her studio recordings, leaving absolutely zero margin for human error. To ensure her appeal remained universal, her image was meticulously sanded down. She was polished into a highly specific presentation designed to make white mainstream audiences feel comfortable. When you are the established standard against which everyone else is measured, you exist in total isolation. Most performers will never experience that specific brand of pressure. These demands for crossover appeal had nothing to do with artistic growth. They were an unyielding requirement for absolute daily perfection, a standard that reached past the limits of human endurance. Visualize her existence as a system under multi-directional pressure. At the center is Whitney. The gospel community expects her to honor sacred roots. In the exact opposite direction, the pop industry demands commercial accessibility. Add the cultural weight of her authentic identity being erased. Somewhere inside all of these competing claims, her own sense of self was trapped, desperately trying to find enough room to simply exist. A single person cannot sustain competing maximum load pressures indefinitely. Eventually, any system under this much strain suffers a structural failure. When she married Bobby Brown in 1992, the public and the media reacted with complete collective confusion. The tabloids quickly built a narrative about a ruined good girl. They missed the reality entirely. Bobby was raw and street, the exact opposite of the hyper-polished crossover product she had been forced to become. After nearly a decade of having every aspect of her identity dictated by executives, what to sing, how to dress, how to speak, choosing him was the first major decision in her adult life that felt entirely like her own. He treated her like the girl from Newark. With him, she found the one space in her life where she didn't have to constantly perform as Whitney Houston, the product. That marriage was certainly troubled, but it did not create her struggles. It was a desperate reach for something unmanufactured and real. Ultimately, the relationship became the container for the immense stress she was already carrying. Her eventual addiction is often framed as a personal moral failing. Instead, it is exactly what happens when all healthy coping mechanisms run out for a human system that is deeply overloaded. There is a physical toll to this kind of sustained pressure. Any instrument used at that extreme volume and frequency for that many years is always going to bear the physical marks of its use. By the late 1990s, anyone paying attention could hear a definitive shift. A new fragility and roughness appeared in passages where there used to be absolute certainty. The world noticed that shift, and the reaction was highly vicious. The media consumed her unraveling with an eager, profitable cruelty reserved specifically for fallen idols. The degradation of her voice and her private life was the literal, undeniable evidence of a human being pushed entirely past capacity. Society chose to punish her simply for proving she had limits. Whitney lived under a state of total system overload, carrying the weight of an entire industry for longer than any person should be asked to endure. She once admitted something haunting in an interview. She said she could no longer tell which parts of her were actually her, and which parts had been built for other people. That is not the complaint of an entitled diva. That is the devastating confession of someone whose original identity was consumed by a manufactured persona. The impossible standard she was held to broke her voice over time. Worse, it slowly erased the human being underneath it, leaving behind only the product we demanded.
You know, the most honest thing Whitney ever said about her legendary voice didn't happen in a glossy magazine interview or a documentary or even during a Grammy acceptance speech. It was actually a quiet, hushed confession later documented by the people closest to her. She said that the voice was never really hers in the way people thought it was. She felt like it was simply on loan, like it belonged to something so much larger than herself, and she was just the vessel it moved through. I mean, imagine carrying that kind of magnitude inside of you every single day.
So this brings us to part 1, the intimate burden and the profound dichotomy of a divine gift.
Now, she definitely recognized this as a tremendous gift. Whitney said that sometimes being the vessel for something that made people feel such profound emotion felt like the greatest privilege in the absolute world. She completely understood the sheer majesty of her ability to move people, to bring them to tears, and to elevate their spirits just by opening her mouth. But here's the thing, a vessel is also a confined space. And sometimes that exact same privilege felt like an absolute prison. The expectation from literally everyone around her was constant, and it was completely suffocating. The voice was always expected. It was always demanded. It created this agonizing daily reality. On one hand, you had the voice, this relentless, demanding force that was the first and only thing the world really wanted from her. And then on the other hand, there was the girl from Newark, an actual, breathing human being. Not the global icon, but a woman with fears, doubts, bad days, and an overwhelming need to just exist without having to perform for a crowd. It's just a heartbreaking divide between what the world demanded and the ordinary person who simply wanted to breathe.
Which leads us to part 2, the endless transaction and her core emotional struggle. You might think her hardest battles were the addiction, the relentless media criticism, or a turbulent marriage. But her struggle was actually far more fundamental than all of that. 17. Whitney Houston gave us a lifetime of legendary performances, yet her entire, profoundly tragic story can be distilled down to exactly 17 words.
She could never figure out how to be loved for something other than what she could do. Just let that sink in for a second. This was an endless transaction, and Whitney was always the one paying. She gave the world the absolute greatest voice it had ever heard. And what did the world give back? Just more demand, more expectation, more of the exact same. Her worth to the world was entirely tied to what she could produce.
And that takes us to part 3, the final chapter, February 11th, 2012.
48. She was only 48 years old. We really have to confront the devastating brevity of her life here. She was found in a Beverly Hills hotel bathtub, and the facts remain brutally stark. Accidental drowning with heart disease and cocaine as contributing factors. At just 48, the woman who gave us literally everything was gone.
But the really crucial point is what happened immediately next. Day 1, global grief pours in from every corner of the earth. Week 1, her records immediately start climbing the charts all over again. Month 1, her videos recirculate everywhere, across every digital platform. The bittersweet irony here is undeniable, isn't it? The very voice she felt trapped by, the voice she couldn't escape in life, was the exact immediate thing the world greedily reached for in death.
So let's move to part 4, a collective responsibility, and how we need to reframe this narrative.
We so often want to put things into neat little boxes. It's super easy to label her story a simple cautionary tale, neatly packaged for a static industry that rarely actually learns its lesson. But the truth is far heavier than that. Talent at the highest level isn't just a gift. It is a profound, shared responsibility for every single person who benefits from it.
Let's look at exactly who those beneficiaries are. The labels, the managers, the producers, and yep, the audiences. That implicates all of us. Every single one of us who buys the albums, who streams the videos on our phones, who feels something move inside us when that legendary voice comes through the speakers. We're all part of this machine. We are all participants in this system.
Which brings us to a really challenging question. Is the standard of perfection the actual problem? When immensely gifted individuals struggle under the crushing weight of a standard that literally has nothing to do with their humanity, we rarely ask ourselves this. Why do we consume these extraordinary gifts without taking steps to protect the extraordinary, vulnerable people living inside them? Finally, part 5, telling her whole story. The only true tribute. This actually gives us a clear, actionable roadmap to finally see her as a whole person. Step 1, acknowledge the voice, absolutely. But step 2, see Whitney. Step 3, remember the girl from Newark. Step 4, honor the daughter of Cissy. She was a woman who gave us far more than everything she had, and she absolutely deserves every single piece of her humanity to be fully seen and remembered. The greatest tribute we can pay to Whitney Houston is not to replay her greatest hits. It is to finally tell her whole story. So, the next time you hear that legendary voice soaring through your speakers, ask yourself, are you just listening to the icon we demanded, or are you finally ready to hear the woman who gave everything to give it to us?